Welcome to Japan on Film podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine, an author and a teacher who's been living and working in Japan for over 10 years now. And today I'm welcoming back, not welcoming for the first time, a new guest to the show, and that is Patrick. Patrick, how you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. So what I like to do with new guests is I like to give them a chance to kind of introduce themselves to the audience, tell them a little bit about themselves. So tell us a little bit about you, where you're from, what you do, and all that.
Sure. I'm in Connecticut. I am an author, primarily horror and science fiction. My first novel, The Gravedigger's Son, I don't know if that's showing up,
Yes, it looks
um,
right there.
is a horror fantasy, kind of Tim Burton-esque.
Mm-hmm.
Follows a boy who grows up in a graveyard, can speak to the dead. And I have a new novel coming out late summer 2021.
Okay,
So,
cool.
yeah.
Is that also going to be? Is that also in the same vein, like dark fantasy horror type stuff?
This one is the new one. It's called Creatures of Clay, and it's a throwback to like 80s horror. And there's some creatures from Jewish mythology that
Oh, okay.
kind of run rampant in this town, and these kids have to figure out what's going on. So,
Okay, cool.
yeah,
So yeah, kind of. It sounds like kind of like a Stephen King-esque vibe there too, as well.
very much so.
Mm-hmm.
Very much so. Kind
Okay,
of
cool.
harkening back to kind of his early stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Awesome. All right. Now, for the show, I like to kind of talk about how you get into Japanese movies. So, and I see you've
Oh
already
man.
got Ultraman and Godzilla who are co-hosting with you today.
Oh yeah, my two co-hosts. Man, that's a really good question because I'm trying to as earlier today I was trying to think. I knew it was a Godzilla film
Hmm.
um, when I was little. Came on TV and I was just blown away because I didn't understand cultural differences. I didn't know what Japan was, where Japan was.
Hmm.
So watching these movies was like the closest I could get to being on another planet. I think it was Ghidorah, the three-headed monster.
Hmm.
Um, so I came into it through that. A lot of Ultraman on television when I was little. But probably the biggest thing that got me into it was my cousin was a huge anime fan
Hmm.
way before it was cool to be an anime fan. And he turned me on to this show, also a manga called Berserk. I don't know if you're
I, I've
familiar with it.
I've heard of it, but I've never actually seen it.
Dark fantasy, very gritty, kind of like almost like Game of Thrones before Game of Thrones.
Hmm.
So he showed me that
Ironic,
in.
I'm actually wearing a Game of Thrones T-shirt right now.
Oh, nice. I'm also a huge fan of that too. Um, so he showed me that anime in 1997. So I was 10, um, and honestly, from there it was just like lifelong love affair. So
Hmm.
went from Berserk to Perfect Blue. Um, Battle Royale. I
Hmm.
actually read the book first. I had
Oh,
no
okay.
idea it was a movie.
Hmm.
I just randomly picked the book up at like a Borders or something, and then I think like 3 years later found out it was a movie, and I think I burned through like two copies of my DVDs just watching that over and over again.
It's
um,
definitely a movie worth burning through DVDs for.
oh, absolutely, absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, it's
Um,
when I first saw that movie, uh it was good. I enjoyed it, and then afterwards I read the novel, and the novel just blew me away. Just because of
right?
like how in like I cried at several points reading that book. It was just so
Yeah,
heartbreaking.
yeah.
And it wasn't until after I moved to Japan that I watched the movie again and watched it again to prepare for when I was decided to teach it in my class. Just seeing how much stuff is in that movie and like how much cultural commentary like that elevated for me. And so now when I talk to people about it, I say like it's the best Japanese movie ever made.
I think it might be. I
Hmm.
mean, a lot of people do hold it in that high regard, and it's just, there's no other movie that even looks or feels like that.
Yeah.
Like even the cameras they use to film it, it just has this kind of grainy,
Hmm.
like otherworldly quality to it that I just loved.
Yeah.
And like you, like I got so attached to the characters in the book. The book is it goes into so much detail.
Hmm.
So every time a character dies, you are just like it's a gut punch,
Yes, yeah,
you
definitely.
know. But I thought, yeah, it was just that was brilliant.
Okay. And so today we are talking about something similar to what got you into Japanese movies. We're talking about Big Man Japan, which is a 2007 comedy slash sci-fi slash superhero slash mockumentary movie, uh, written and directed and starring Hitoshi Matsumoto, who's a pretty famous Japanese comedian, from
Yeah,
what my
I
wife
was
tells me.
actually gonna. Yeah, I was gonna ask you, living in Japan, if he was like a household name, because I know he's part of a very popular comedy duo.
Hmm.
But I'm not. I don't. The cultural differences. I know the whole manzai thing.
Hmm.
Still very popular over there. I think
Oh
he's
yeah,
part
yeah.
of. He's
I
in.
I don't know much because I honestly cannot stand watching Japanese television.
Yeah.
It just it grates on me. And but my wife is Japanese, so she watches Japanese TV and variety shows and stuff like that. And when I started watching this, she's like, "Oh yeah, yeah, yeah," and she knew him like right away.
Oh, okay. I had a feeling that's what it was because it seems like he couldn't really get away with making these films if he wasn't already like a big name.
Well, actually, I think it also kind of works. It works for him and it works against him in that way because it works for him in that it gives him the clout to make these movies, but it works against him because my wife said, and she's like, I don't know anybody who likes this movie. She's like, everybody
Really?
I know just thinks it's terrible.
Yeah, my wife has similar feelings, mostly about the ending though, which I'm sure we'll
Mhm,
get to. That'll
mhm.
be quite the thing to break down. I'm not even sure what to make of it. And I think I've
Yeah.
seen this. I think this was my sixth time
Oh
watching
wow.
this movie. Yeah, most of the times I've watched it have been showing people like,
Hmm.
"Come on, sit down. You got to watch this." Like,
That
there's
was
nothing.
um that was me with Gozu was like my go-to show people
Oh,
movie.
yes, that's a great one too.
Yeah. So, but well, take me back to what was your first experience watching this movie?
Let's see. I came to it. I think it was from an article in Sci-Fi Japan, which I usually use to kind of just keep up with stuff, the new releases and such.
Mm,
I think I first saw it in 2012. Um, and I loved it every
mm,
second of it because, like I said, I grew up watching Godzilla, Ultraman, so this was just like a spot on um, tribute spoof,
mm,
kind of a little bit of everything mixed in.
mm,
Um, so yeah, about 2011, 2012 was the first time I've seen it, and yeah, probably six, dare I say, seven times since
mm,
then.
mm.
Um, just one of those movies that you you just need to show other people, at
Right,
least for
right.
me.
Hmm.
You know.
So what has the reaction been when you show it to other people?
Honestly, it's been nothing but positive.
Okay.
Everybody that I've shown it to has loved it. Um, might be a bit biased though, because they're also huge kaiju
Right.
tokusatsu
Yeah.
fans. You know.
You know your
Um,
audience.
yeah, exactly. So I know the people to pick out. You know, you'll love this. You
Hmm.
know.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah. So the only averse reaction has been my wife, who has some valid criticisms.
Hmm.
Um, but she also enjoys the first hour and a half of it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, I my first experience was last night watching it to prepare for this episode. So this is my
Oh
first time.
wow.
Yeah, yeah. So it was my first time watching it. Um and I'm like, there's like half of the movie I think is great, and then half of the movie it's like I feel like it's just way too drawn out in a lot of points.
Yes. That's always been my um I guess biggest gripe with it is I
Mhm.
think you could easily shave off probably like a half hour of this movie.
Yeah, at least I'd say at least, yeah.
There's a lot of long lingering shots on him just kind of like sitting there staring off into the distance that it's nice from an acting standpoint, like you really do believe this guy.
Hmm.
um but just from a time standpoint, it is just way too
It
drawn out,
just
I
gets,
think.
yeah, it's a little bit too much.
Yeah, it is. I love how they dive into it. It reminded me of Shin Godzilla, how
Hmm.
that movie looked in a you know, what would this look like in real life, you know, if this
Yeah.
actually were to happen. So looking at essentially an Ultraman
Hmm.
going about his day-to-day life, I love how intricate they got with it, going
Yeah,
into like
yeah.
every facet of it. But did you really need to? I don't know. You
Hmm.
probably could have left, you know, some stuff out, but
Also, I had an issue with the version I watched because the subtitles on it were really bad. Like there was
were they
like,
really?
yeah, they were. It was because I got to get my movies here in Japan, so a lot of the movies they don't have subtitles. So
Yeah,
when I put them on my in my hard drive for viewing on Apple TV, I've got to also find subtitles for them. And
right.
this, I'm pretty sure this was like a fan sub thing because even like simple things, there were like mistakes that I clearly knew with my very imperfect Japanese.
Uh-huh. Oh wow. Interesting.
And there were some things
Um,
like a lot of newspaper article headlines, they just didn't bother subtitling those at all. Or
oh yeah, that always bugs me.
mm. So yeah, there were
There's
a lot
a
of problems with that, which uh, probably interfered with my enjoyment of the movie this time around.
yeah. Oh, that's such a bummer because it is such a I mean it's so dialogue driven. It's crazy.
Yeah, yeah,
That
very
so if
much.
you had a bad subtitle, that's yeah. Ugh. I wish you saw it under better circumstances.
Yeah, I was thinking after I finished watching, like I got to find a better subtitles and try and rewatch
Yeah.
this again and again at another point.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, I just didn't have time to do it before this episode. So
Right.
there's I think there's definitely some things I've missed. Like one thing, for example, is and I only got this from reading the Wikipedia because the monster that he's unable to beat at the end, according to
Hmm.
Wikipedia at least, it says that the monster is not from Japan but from Korea. And now I don't remember that being mentioned in the subtitles at all.
Okay. There's see, I don't recall that either, but there is this one part. I don't know if you remember. It goes to a newscast
Hmm.
from this woman. I believe she's speaking Korean, and it seems like one of those very whenever you see like news broadcasts out of North Korea, how
Oh,
they
okay.
wear those very pastel
Hmm.
colors, and it's a very the way they're speaking, praising the great leader and all that. I think that was supposed to be the announcement of this monster.
All right. So the implication is
It's a
that it's so the implication
yeah,
is that it's actually from North Korea then.
I believe so. I
Okay.
believe so. Don't hold me to that, but that's my best guess.
Okay.
And it's a very quick scene too. Like if you looked away, you would miss it.
Yeah, I was wondering because when I read that, it because when we get to the end, right, and these other heroes come in, it seems like they're very clearly stand-ins for like American military power,
Sure.
and so it kind of the reading I got from it is kind of like Japan's decline in the world is
Mm.
and just its declining power over the years. So you've got like his ancestors who are they're loved by the public, they're very powerful and all that, but now you've got him who he's very he's able to there's just like these one or two monsters a year, they're very ineffectual and he's just kind of like bumbling around, everybody hates him. and
Yes.
and then you have this other new stronger monster that comes from overseas, which you know and then he needs the help of the American forces to defeat it. So I thought at first I was thinking um, maybe that has something to do with the fact that South Korea is rising economically in the past like 20, 30 years or so, while
Hmm.
Japan's been declining. But then the American military helping Japan overthrow it kind of doesn't click with that. So then I was thinking maybe it was actually supposed to be China. And
Yeah. Yeah, you definitely get the sense that there's this grand tradition that's
mhm,
been eroded, and
yeah.
it is constantly eroding. So when you see like what does he call his grandfather, the fourth?
Mhm,
I loved those flashbacks. That whole sequence of the old newsreel footage.
mhm,
Um, I thought especially like the CGI, and that's another thing too. The CGI doesn't quite hold up, but I think
mhm.
for this movie, it works in this strange sense because it's like otherworldly anyway.
Hmm.
And the monsters are so ridiculous, and it's just like, yeah. So I do think the dated CGI works.
Yeah, I thought it actually really worked, especially with the type of movie this is, and the
Yeah.
fact that it is like this love letter to like the kaiju stuff. So I thought the CGI really worked in its favor.
Hmm. Hmm. Um, yeah, and that man, that ending. I had this great idea because I watched the movie last night, and then I put it on shortly before this, the end, just to watch it again because it still confounds me after 7 viewings. Um, Initially, my thought was when he meets all of those other or that ultra, I'll just call them ultra
Mhm.
family. Um, I had always taken that as he finally found others who are in the same line of work, like because the whole movie is him. It's just a man alone,
Right, yeah.
and it's all about his isolation. But after watching it tonight a second time, that ending, I'm still not sure. And I think what you
Mhm.
said about having it, as a stand-in for American militarism,
Mhm.
um, definitely makes a lot more sense because it is quite uh, brutal the way they just beat the ever-loving crap out of
Yeah, that's another thing that goes on a little
this
bit
kid.
too long.
Like way too long,
Yeah.
way too long, and it just becomes vicious and like mean spirited.
Mhm.
And you could tell even Daisato, Big Man Japan, is kind of looking at it like, what the hell is going on? And like he doesn't really want to be involved, but he kind of resolves himself. Um, yeah, this is probably one of the most polarizing endings I could think of in a
Mhm.
movie. Um, yeah, still don't know what to make of it. I don't know if I ever will. I don't know if it's a cultural thing, or just a odd screenwriting choice.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't know either. And judging from what my wife didn't watch the whole thing with me. I think she fell asleep like right at the beginning.
mhm.
But judging from what she said about other people's reactions to this movie, she said like a lot of people are just like, I have no idea what's happening in this movie.
Right.
So I think
Um,
it's probably more of a screenwriting choice than anything else. I think.
yeah, it almost seems like they didn't quite know how to end it, so they were
Hmm.
just like, well, what could we do? Oh, we've been filming a tokusatsu basically spoof this whole
Hmm.
time. Why don't we actually build something and smash some buildings and have
Yeah, yeah.
people stomp around on a stage? It kind of felt like that. Like, well, we
Hmm.
have the time and the money to do it, so let's go ahead and do it.
Yeah, yeah, and but also there is kind of a tradition of that in with Japanese movies ending having these kind of weird ambiguous endings. Like I go back to Gozu's like that.
Right.
A lot of Miike films are like that actually. Now that I think about it, where it's got a lot of them
Hmm.
have this kind of like weird kind of ambiguous ending. Um,
Yeah.
a lot of the horror stuff has a lot of that kind of ending too.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. The Japanese, I've noticed, do love ambiguous
Mhm.
endings.
Well, even you mentioned Shin Godzilla earlier. That has something too as well. It has that scene
Oh.
at the end where it's like
Hmm.
the tail is was starting to transform into like human sized creatures.
Right. Which I absolutely loved.
Yeah, yeah,
And I know a lot of people were like, "Oh, right, like right when that scene happened and the credits started, everybody was like in the theater, like so disappointed, like wanted to keep going." But I loved how they just ended it there.
yeah. We talked
Um,
about that movie on one of the past episodes, and that was just a that was a movie that was really did an amazing job of blending the kaiju type of thing with you know just like the original Godzilla did with like the real world stuff that was happening at that time. Like being in
right.
Japan during the 311 and all that, like it just rang so true to what was going on here.
Oh man. Yeah, I just watched Fukushima 50 over the weekend,
Mhm.
and it was fantastic. I don't know if you've seen it yet.
This is the is this a documentary or
No, this is it stars Ken Watanabe. It's
okay.
the first actual film that they've made about the 311 disaster.
I've heard
Um,
of this movie. I haven't seen it yet. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, it's great. I went into it, as an American with, my expectations of like a disaster film,
Hmm.
which it is kind of sort of, but much more of a realistic film.
Hmm.
There's no, big Hollywood. The hero comes and saves the day, and people run from explosions down a hallway. It's very true to life, I guess.
Hmm. Hmm.
The best way to put it. So it's I went into it expecting something else, but I came away really loving it.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was fantastic. But
So, what were some of the other reactions that people had about the ending? Because I know you said you've shown it to a lot of people.
oh god, some people just laugh
Hmm.
and just think it's completely ridiculous, which it is.
Yeah.
um I've never actually had like a really big discussion with anybody about it.
Hmm.
It's always just kind of like, huh, that was weird, or I like the rest of this movie, what the hell was that? So that's usually the reaction that
Hmm.
it gets.
It is this. I'm leaning more as we're talking. I'm leaning because it's also like this. It's very much like the standard nuclear family, the
Hmm.
American nuclear family, like even down to the really creepy baby with the glowing eyes.
Yeah, who knew that the baby was the strongest one?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, I think, also probably a reference to this old show Space Giants,
Okay.
which the very tall one with the big horns.
Hmm.
That's what the Space Giants look like. It was an old show, I think pre-Ultraman,
Okay.
uh, early '60s, or maybe like right when Ultraman was coming out. It was like one of the, jump on the bandwagon. Let's make a tokusatsu show.
That probably sounds more like it because if my memory serves, the Japanese Spider-Man was actually the first show to really do that, and then
Oh yes.
after that, then came because in fact, one I think it was the Super Sentai series was actually supposed to be like a Captain America spinoff because Marvel and Toei had this agreement back in the time. So
Oh
Marvel could,
really?
yeah, yeah. Was it Toei or was it Toho? I can't remember who, but Marvel had this agreement where um, they could make Japanese TV shows based on
Hmm.
the Marvel properties, and then Marvel could do comic books based on their properties. So that's where we got like they did like a Shogun Warriors comic, and
Right.
I believe I'm pretty sure this is where the Godzilla comic book came out as well that Marvel did for a while.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know
And
that. I always assumed that kind of like international copyrights, maybe they just got away with
no, no,
Spider-Man.
it was a fully in it was a full it was a full on agreement between the two. And when the agreement expired, right? They had already started development on the Captain America show, but they couldn't call it Captain America or anything anymore. So then they just used everything and used it for a Super Sentai series instead.
Oh wow,
So
okay. That makes a lot of sense
yeah,
actually.
so
I can see how one would lead into the other.
it's really funny when you think about it that Super Sentai happened because of this agreement with Marvel, with an American company, and then later the Super Sentai stuff gets taken back to America for Power Rangers. So
Oh, it's
there's
yeah,
this
huge.
incredible synergy between the two of them. Like,
Yeah, it really, I mean, I I remember being in love with Power Rangers and having no idea that it
mhm.
was a Japanese property. Um, yeah, I remember when I found that out, I was like, wait a minute, does is everything from my childhood that I love from Japan? I mean, Zelda, Mario, Power Rangers,
Mhm.
God, everything.
Just about, yeah. Especially, I'm guessing we're probably around the same age, and so you came up in the late '80s, early '90s. I'm guessing.
Hmm.
Then yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So like our child, that was like the huge wave of like Japan inspired stuff, or like
yeah,
even before Power Rangers and all that, there was the whole Ninja Turtles craze, which was
right.
all inspired by that stuff as well.
It's like even if it was Japanese, you didn't know it was Japanese because that's
Right.
just how it was fed to us. But it
Hmm.
was all coming from there. Yeah, their cultural uh, entertainment like output, I think, is just as strong as ours, really.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And that was one of the things that Japan was really moving into in the late 80s, early 90s, was it was all about cultural exports. So it's like,
Mm.
let's export our culture, let's make people love Japan. And so it was all about like anime and manga and getting all this stuff overseas. And that's one of the reasons why, like, the Japanese passport is the most accepted one in the world now. It's like
Oh, right.
so many countries will now allow, a visa-less entry on if you have a Japanese passport.
Interesting. I didn't
Yeah,
know that.
it's like the number one in the world. I think there's only I can't remember. There's like almost every country would allow you entry without a visa on a Japanese passport.
Wow.
Yeah,
So they just look at it, they're like, okay, you gave us Pokemon, you gave us all this great stuff. Come on in.
basically, yeah, yeah.
You're okay.
You get an automatic tourist visa that way. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Now, also going back to the family at the end, and something you mentioned about how, like, he's unsure about all this, and they like keep like pushing him in to do stuff, like, join in
Hmm.
the formation, and he just
Right.
and they're the ones using their power, and he just has his hand there. You even see the scene where like kind of takes it off and it doesn't change anything.
Yeah. He
And
he
then
actually he looks at the camera and goes, I don't think I'm helping.
yeah, and then they want him to fly with him, and he's like, oh no, I don't fly. Then he's like, okay, I guess so. And it's very much kind of felt like the U.S. felt like a commentary on the U.S. attitude towards Japan during the Iraq War, because like the U.S. was like forcing Japan to be part of the
The
coalition.
coalition.
Yeah, yeah, and like
Yeah.
even with like helping out with non-combat stuff, and it was like a huge thing with like the Bush administration forcing Japan to do this with their security treaties and all that. And
Right.
so I very much got a sense of that came back in my mind as I was watching that scene, because this is not that far off, because this movie came out in 2007, so it was the tail end of the Bush
Right.
administration.
And they do talk about in one of the scenes, I believe it's when he's at the playground and they're
Mm,
talking about his daughter. He does bring up that he was raised with anti-U.S. sentiments.
yeah.
I think the documentarian goes, well, do you still think that way? And he's kind of like, not really. Like it was all around me. So yeah, I think that probably that makes sense. That your interpretation, I think, is definitely the most logical I've
Mhm.
heard, instead of just, oh, that was weird.
Well, there's a lot of that going on about there's a lot of stuff in there about like Japanese society and about the different generations, because there's that thing he constantly comes back to is like, this generation has no responsibility, right? This new generation that's
Yeah.
coming up. And meanwhile, like, his generation hasn't really done much either.
Hmm.
So and you see a lot of this in modern Japan, because there's all these, there's all this you see it in America to a lesser extent, like all the millennial bashing, but
Hmm.
you also see it in Japan with the whole thing is like, oh, well, young people aren't having children, they're not getting married, they're turning away from traditional employment. It's like, what's wrong with them? What's wrong with them? It's all their fault. It's like, well, you know, you you've stopped giving them all the benefits at work for a lifetime employment. You're still forcing them to work long hours for less pay than their parents did, and and there's all these changing values, right? Like, women don't want to give up their careers, because as soon as they get married they get pressured into having kids and
Hmm.
then quitting. So
Right.
it is kind of like you see a lot of that with him blaming the current generation for all the problems, when really it's his own generation that has to shoulder most of the blame.
Hmm. And you get this great sense of apathy,
Hmm.
just from everybody, including his agent too, who honestly just could not care less about what's actually happening, just as
Hmm.
long as she keeps getting paid.
Yeah.
um, I love that aspect of it. But even yeah, when they're interviewing like teenagers and stuff on the street, oh, so what did you think about the fight? Could have
Hmm.
been better. Like, just kind of like,
Hmm.
there's a lot of shoulder shrugging, you know?
Well, even his daughter, right? When they interview his daughter, and and they're like, do you like your father? And she's like, I don't really know.
Yeah. Oh God.
And do you would you like to live with your father or your mother? And she's like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. That does seem to be like the prevailing like attitude, at least that
Mhm.
they were trying to show in the film. Um,
Well, even with
yeah,
him, like he's even Daisato has that kind of attitude too, where because he gets like bricks are being thrown through his like that.
and it's
That was
just
one of the scenes that scene was just hilarious. At the that was one of the scenes that I really laughed out loud at was when
mhm.
he's doing the interview and then a brick flies through and he just acts like nothing and then he continues the interview. It cuts to another one. They've got the window covered and then a brick flies through the other pane.
It goes from day to night, and
Mm-hmm.
he's just like lets out this huge sigh, like, "Oh God, it's happening
Mm-hmm.
again."
Mm-hmm.
I loved it. That scene too, right before the brick. I love the little touches, like just this the way that this screenplay is written. I think is brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as a mockumentary, a take on the genre. I think these guys are really fans of it. I think you
Oh
kind of
yeah.
have to be.
Yeah, if
You know.
that's one of the things with when you're doing like parody type stuff is
Hmm.
if you're not a fan of it, then it just comes off as mean spirited.
Right.
And
Yeah, you have to love the source material.
this never comes off as mean spirited. It always you always sense like a genuine affection
Hmm.
for the stuff that came before.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, the little touches too, like when he was right before that the brick scene, he's eating the dehydrated seaweed or
Mm-hmm.
rehydrated
Mm-hmm.
seaweed. I couldn't tell. I didn't know if my subtitles were not working. I'm like, is it D or re? I don't know. Um, but he mentions, I love it because it only gets big when you need it to. And I was
So I'm
like,
pretty sure
oh,
I think that it's dehydrated seaweed, and then when you put it in the water, then it expands.
expands. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, also with the, why do you carry the umbrellas? Why do you like umbrellas so much? Well, I love them. They only get big when you need them to. I'm like, oh, he said it again. Awesome. All right.
Mhm.
It's just like noticing all these little touches that keep it so consistent. Was just so great.
Mhm.
Yeah, I cannot praise the writing of this movie enough.
Yeah, it has some really good writing. My whole thing is just coming back to what we mentioned the other. It is a little bit more editing would have been good, I think.
Hmm. Yeah, I think they might have given him a little too much leeway being the writer, director,
Yeah.
producer. I think he had final say with everything. But
Hmm.
yeah, maybe a little less lingering shots on him just kind of brooding in the
Hmm.
distance would have been
Yeah,
nice.
yeah.
But again, it definitely goes into just the loneliness of this character,
Hmm.
um, which I think is really like the driving force behind the movie. You feel so much sympathy for this guy,
Hmm.
and even when he goes to bake, which I love how they call it baking,
Hmm.
him getting zapped.
Hmm.
Um, he has to go to these rundown power plants that look abandoned until he shows up at the gate, and then some guy comes out and salutes him, and you're like,
Hmm.
oh, okay, so it is functioning. Um,
Which also
which
I think
then,
goes to the society decline of Japan because that you see that a lot in these types of like government buildings and stuff, just like because funding has been slashed for all these services. So you do see a lot of that if you've ever worked in like if you ever or not even worked in just like been inside like government buildings in Japan. It is very much like that. They look very run down from the outside and
oh, really?
especially in like smaller towns and things like that.
Okay, I could see that. Yeah, that the scene of him riding the moped up and passing all the signs.
Hmm.
Did your on your version? Did they tell you what all the signs were saying?
No, they just completely ignored all the signs. I don't know what the guy
Oh
who
man.
who did the subtitles was thinking. And
Oh,
as they were going up, like they went by too fast for me to really read them or to really make sense of what they said. So I did catch like a few of them generally,
mhm.
but yeah, I missed a lot of them.
A lot of it was it starts off with stop littering, a lot of
Hmm.
anti-littering things. Then there's another one that says God is watching you. Then there's another one that says stop destroying the city, and then
Hmm.
it gets more and more aggressive about him specifically. So like
Oh, okay.
as he's going up to the power plant, he's just inundated with these
Hmm.
messages of, please stop. um, which yeah was so great. Um, But even when he gets baked and becomes Big Man Japan, there's something that I noticed, and I didn't notice it the first maybe 2 times I watched it. Um, Even when he's Big Man Japan fighting these monsters, there's still this incredible sense of loneliness that they
Hmm.
give to this film because there's no music, there's no screaming, running crowds of people.
Hmm.
There's no sounds of cars or anything. The streets are completely empty, and it's
Hmm.
just him and this whatever weird monstrosity he has to go up against. And it really is just him alone.
Well, and that I think that point is really driven home after the first battle we see, because then you see the scene when everybody else is celebrating and they're drinking and everything, and he's lying in this big room just alone and just looks like completely gutted.
Hmm. Yeah, everybody else gets to enjoy the the outcome of his
Hmm.
fight except for him. You
Well, even
know.
when he's in the battles, and I think you could chalk part of this up to the rudimentary CGI, but it just doesn't feel like he's enthusiastic at all about doing this job. It's just very much
No.
going through the motions type of thing.
Very much so. Even to the point of just deciding not to fight sometimes at
Hmm.
all and just
Yeah.
running away. Yeah, you really get the sense that he's just like rudderless out there.
Hmm.
Like no, like no motivation really. It's just like, here we go again. All right, I guess I'll bash you with this bar that I have for some reason. That also gets big.
There's also that but when he has those two monsters in this, and the one monster who's like squid like thing that he meets up with,
Yep.
and
The
and
stink
he's not
monster.
even, yeah, and he's not even trying to fight it. It's just like he's just saying like, hey, stop doing that, stop doing that. What did that card do to you?
I know. He's just it's like it's almost like they're just two like drunk guys yelling at each other.
Yeah.
You get the one leaning up against the building, his fingers keep poking through the windows. He's like, "Stop that. Stop that. No, you go away. No, you go home. Now you go." It was just like it was unbelievable. I loved it.
And then yeah, that you're right, I didn't think about it, but it is exactly like that.
Yeah.
Just like these two drunk salarymen getting on a fight on a train platform or something.
Mhm. Yeah. No, get out of my face. No, you go. You
Mhm.
go. Yeah, it was
And
great.
then they got the other one. He's like, and he's like, well, tell him not to do that. It's like, aren't you the one who's supposed to be stopping these things?
Just completely wants to wash his hands of it.
Hmm.
He's just so done.
Hmm.
Yeah, please make sure you move your arms so we can see the
Hmm.
advertisement on your chest. I loved it.
And there's also the scene when he goes to the hostess bar with
Hmm.
his childhood friend, and I did notice afterwards they got the scene when they're talking to the other two women who work there who are non-Japanese, because they make the whole point of them trying to pronounce different Japanese words.
Oh, I didn't even pick up on that.
Oh yeah, yeah. So because a lot of these a lot of the so I'm not sure if you know about the hostess bar system or anything like that in Japan.
Hmm.
Okay.
A little bit, a little bit.
Okay. So for anyone who's listening and doesn't know what I'm talking about here, in Japan they have these places, different names for them, like hostess bars or cabaret clubs um, or snack bars or whatever it is. And basically, what it is you go in there and you pay like a set fee, and it varies depending on what town you're in, the quality of the place you're in. But it's like minimum, I think, is probably like maybe $15 an hour, or and that could go all the way up to like a few $100 an hour. And the whole
Hmm.
idea is like you go into these places, you get to, during for that hour you have like the charge covers your unlimited drinks. It's like an open bar type situation, limited options, but and and then they have a girl come and sit and talk, who works with their come sit and talk with you basically.
Hmm.
And it's
Right.
that kind of thing is how it works. And a lot of the there are a lot of like the lower rent ones, a lot of the cheaper ones, they have a lot of foreign women working in there. So you got women from China or Taiwan or the Philippines, especially, or Korea. And so there was Russia, even, or Eastern Europe, a lot of those places around too. And so that seemed that I noticed they made a big point to focus on these women pronouncing these different Japanese words.
Interesting. Very interesting. I always found that whole the hostess bar to be just kind of it's such a Japanese
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
In my head it was always like, okay, you go to this place, you drop a bunch of money, and basically you're treated like a king for the extent that you're there, and then you go home and, well, that was nice, but yeah.
Yeah,
Kind
basically,
of like this very fabricated scenario.
Exactly. You know?
Yeah.
It
Which also I loved that's really Daisato's only the only time really you see him happy is
yes, I was about to
hostess
mention
bar.
that too. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, yeah, this woman is his friend, but it's also kind of like her job to.
I wondered how much of that was true. Her saying,
Yeah.
"Oh yeah, we're childhood friends and everything." I did wonder how much of that is actually true.
Yeah, I kind of got the idea that they were just kind of like loose acquaintances, and she's kind of maybe the only thing in the world that could be considered a friend to Daisato.
They also make that point of asking her what her age is, which if they're interviewing Daisato, they would already know. So if they're childhood friends, you'd assume they're about the same age.
Yeah, which I also loved because she goes, "Well, how old do you think I am?" And the guy just immediately goes to 50, which I was just like, "Oh, dude, no."
That was another bad translation. Like the subtitle said 30s. I'm like, that's not what she said. That's not what he said at all.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, he goes straight to 50. I love her reaction though. She just laughs. Yeah, she was.
Which implies that she very much was in her 50s.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally. But yeah, the Daisato, him and the hostess bar. I really enjoyed that scene because you can see him finally relax and enjoy himself. But then it's also, he's at a hostess bar, so
right, yeah,
there's this sheen of fakeness to it anyway. So even his the pleasures in his life aren't quite real, and he still has to pay for them.
Right, exactly.
And
especially, and he's on he doesn't have a lot of money, right? He says he makes like $2,000 to $3,000 a month, basically, which
right
in some places in Japan that's fine, but in Tokyo you're gonna be struggling.
Yeah, I was thinking about that because especially watching it now, because he said with the pension he gets 2,000, and then with the advertisements he gets an additional 3.
Okay.
So I was like, all right, 5,000 a month. The way the world is now, that's not bad at all. But Tokyo, oof, yeah, that probably wouldn't go very far, I'm guessing. Just because I've heard nothing but how Tokyo is so expensive. I think it's probably the most expensive city to live in.
I don't think it's that. I don't think that's true. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about that as well because.
Oh, are there? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, feel free to set me straight.
Well, I mean, I don't live in Tokyo, so I wouldn't be able to fully comment on it. But I do know people who live, pretty comfortably on like 5,000 a month there. So.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't think 5,000 a month would be out of the realm of possibility in Tokyo. Depending on where in Tokyo you live, though, would be a big part of it.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I was trying to really judge, like, is that a lot of money? Is that like, a pittance, or is it, livable? I
also,
wasn't quite sure.
Calling Tokyo a city is kind of a misnomer. It's really more of a city-state.
Right. It's it's like 10 cities on top of each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
So yeah, that would really depend on where he is. But even still, the point still stands that he doesn't have a lot of money. So it does add to the sadness that the only way he can get he can feel any sort of happiness in his life is by wasting his money on these women who pretend to like him.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Very very poignant. Yeah, man, you just feel for this guy.
Yeah,
At
and
least
there is that.
At least I do.
Oh yeah. There is that sense that he's got no friends in his life whatsoever, because it's
No.
the mama-san at the hostess bar. Obviously, we know why she's hanging around.
Mhm.
The agent, she's making her living off of him, and even when he's like struggling with something, she's basically like, I don't care.
Right. Just completely staring at her phone, unresponsive. Oh, hey, is that a new car that you bought? Like, she shows up to the meeting in a $50,000 SUV, and he took the bus there.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, it's great.
And also the strained relationship with his ex-wife, or current wife. But there's that scene, right, when they ask her, can we show this to him? And she says, oh yeah, sure. And then you see him watching her, basically saying, she's like, I want to get a divorce.
Yeah, you see her talking about the guy who owns the business that she's working part-time at. She already has a framed picture of him, talking about how well the daughter likes him. And yeah, right when it cuts to Sato looking at that footage, I was just like, oh god.
And that's equally crushing when you understand how divorce and remarriage works in a lot of times in Japan, where it's when you, and it's not universal, right? I do know people who have still, but in a lot of times when you get divorced, it's like complete cutoff from like the father gets like completely cut off from the children, everything like that.
Oh,
And
really?
and if the woman gets remarried, like, it's because they have the family registry system where everybody in the family has to have the same last name. So a woman gets remarried, she takes her new husband's last name. Her children also take the new husband's last name.
Oh,
And
wow.
it's just
Okay.
like, it is literally like replacing the father in a lot of
Jeez.
instances. Yeah.
Yeah, that's that sounds very harsh, and
It
also
is, yeah.
it sounds like a bureaucratic nightmare, because that's a lot of paperwork for
Yeah,
those poor
yeah.
kids.
Now I don't know. Now again, that's not near universal. I do know people who their parents got divorced and their fathers were still very much part of their lives even after the mothers got remarried. So there
Sure.
are obviously exceptions, but
hmm
especially a lot of times that is kind of like the standard operating procedure. And especially when you think like the people who had a different situation, that tends to be more of a recent phenomenon. You go back to 2007, it was probably more the norm for the father to be cut off.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And not just because he is a giant monster fighting
Right, yeah, just in
city
general.
record.
I've known women who have gotten divorced and remarried, and who've had kids, and they just like, oh no, the biological father, it's just completely gone, like never.
Wow.
Nothing. Yeah.
Wow. It's like, yeah, they're like living with a ghost or something.
Yeah. So
Jeez.
so when you go in knowing that makes that scene all the more heartbreaking.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was heartbreaking to begin with.
Yeah.
But after knowing that, oh boy. Yeah.
All right. So was there any other things that you really wanted to touch on with this movie, or anything else that really kind of jumped out
Let's
at
see.
you?
I'm kind of this was my first time watching a movie and actually taking notes, which was interesting. So I'm loving what I decided was, I thought, important enough to write down. Let's see. I wrote down the umbrella, makes $5,000. He loves his super noodles, so we do have that. Gotta love that. Oh, the this was a weird thing, and I hope I'm right, because if I'm not, I just have no idea what this is supposed to signify. But when the monsters are killed, they ascend to heaven. For me, I thought that was a takeoff on Neon Genesis Evangelion, the anime series. I don't know if you're familiar.
I've only seen like the first episode, and it was a very long time ago. I've been meaning
Okay.
to actually sit down and watch the whole thing, especially now that it's on Netflix.
Yeah, it's fantastic. But the angels, what they call the monsters, every time one of those are killed, this gigantic crucifix
Mm-hmm.
appears where they were. It's either
Okay.
made out of light or it's made out of like a fountain of gushing blood. So the weird Christian iconography all over that series.
Mm.
Um, and that's really the only thing I could point to, um, why they would have them do that, unless that was just another, wouldn't it be funny if we had them do this weird
Mm-hmm.
ascending to heaven thing.
Yeah.
um,
I'm not sure because I was wondering about that myself. And I think your explanation probably makes the most sense because I can't think of anything else that would really fit in. And you know, especially when you look at how this does touch on it is very much influenced by the kaiju type stuff, and
mhm,
you know, Neon Genesis Evangelion would definitely fit into that kind of on the side. But they have
mhm.
all this other like tokusatsu stuff in there. Like you got the team who are all wearing like identical costumes with face masks, and you got the giant monsters and all that. So you got the one character who does grow into giant size, but he's still basically a person. That
Mhm.
there are a lot of shows that did that. That's what Ultraman did, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Mhm. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, it would make sense that they took that as well from Neon Genesis.
Okay. Well, I'm going to. I'm very happy that you agree with me because that's my own personal pet theory.
Because you're right, I can't really think of anything else it might be because they don't.
Yeah, I was really racking my brain, trying to think of what possibly could they be riffing on,
Mhm.
and yeah, that was the only thing that came to mind. So hopefully I'm right. I don't know. Somebody get back to me.
Yeah. So was there anything else that you wanted to talk about with this movie?
Um, I loved the relationship with his grandfather, the
Mhm.
fourth. Loved his backstory with his father. How his father was very harsh on him and basically forced him to turn or bake when he was
Oh God,
younger.
that scene where they electrify
Yeah,
the
yeah,
nipples, and
yeah.
it's like these two volcanoes are left behind afterwards.
Yeah, very, very strange, but loved the
Mhm.
practical effects. I thought that
Mhm.
was cool. But I just loved the fact that he would still go and visit his grandfather.
Mhm.
It reminded me of growing up. My grandmother had dementia,
Oh, okay.
and we really had to keep an eye on her because she would wander.
Right.
And they bring that up in this movie, and there's the whole sequence where the fourth, I guess, gets baked and leaves the nursing home, and you
Mhm.
see him, whistling into a smokestack and like just napping on top of a building. I just thought that was great,
Was that whistling?
and very sweet.
I could have sworn he was trying to smoke the smokestack.
Was he okay?
I couldn't really
He
tell
could have
either.
been. I thought he was doing like the blowing on a jug
Oh,
type deal,
I took it as him trying to inhale the smoke.
taking a couple
Because
hits.
yeah, because the whole thing is like, back in the day, everybody in Japan smoked, and like even still, like old men are like the strongest smokers in Japan.
Right. Yeah, yeah. Okay, I could see that too. But yeah, just his relationship with his grandfather I thought was
Mhm.
very sweet. Love how they got together at the end.
Mhm.
Um, didn't love how he accidentally kills him by kicking him in the head. But yeah, I really liked. I loved the family element in this story, and I loved how it is kind of coming from the place of, look, this is this grand tradition that spans back.
Mhm.
Look at the wall. You could see the our ancestors have been doing this forever.
Mhm.
Um, there's just something so I found so special about that, and also so heartbreaking because
Mhm.
you see where it ends up,
Yeah.
and
There's also that.
clearly.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, and clearly it seems like he's the last one. Like there's not gonna be any more um, big man Japans running around.
Well, that actually ties into what I tried accidentally cut in on was the baby. right? When he finds the monster baby there.
Yes.
And there's almost kind of like this sense that he wants the baby to be his successor. You get kind of like that subtext there, and then the baby bites his. And I can relate to that because my daughter's a month old, and like whenever I'm holding her and she's hungry, she's like always trying to look for a nipple. Yeah,
she's chomping away.
She tries. Yeah, luckily I don't wear her without a shirt on, so I don't have to worry about that. And she doesn't have any teeth yet, too. So.
Oh, perfect.
But that was both heartbreaking and also hilarious when the baby just bites his nipple and he just drops it and kills it.
And it's just it's unbelievable. Because you look at it and you go, oh my God, he just did that. Like he just killed this little poor baby. But then honestly, I think a great if I'm putting on my editor screenwriter hat here, that last scene, and I think this is after the baby's death. He's in the bar and the documentarian is starting to ask him about his childhood, and that's when it goes into the flashback. Then when he leaves and he's kind of just like drunkenly walking away, and he turns to these two guys sitting at the table and goes, "I'm Big Man Japan," and they don't even look at him. And then he's just walking down this alley by himself, kind of swerving. I thought that would have been probably a good place to end it.
Yeah,
honestly. But we got what we got.
Yeah.
So I will say, this is one of my favorite giant monster movies for sure. I just think it's so thoughtful. Just like Shin Godzilla, I think was like definitely the most thoughtful Godzilla movie we've ever gotten. Which I hope now that I think now that Toho, after we get Godzilla vs. Kong, I believe the rights revert back to them. So I'm very interested to see what types of Godzilla movies they come out with.
Right. My understanding of that is that the rights with Legendary were just for those 3 movies. So it was Godzilla, then King of the Monsters, and then Godzilla vs. Kong. And then after that, if they do want to do any more Godzilla movies, they have to renegotiate with Toho for another deal.
Right.
So, but as far as I know, Toho hasn't announced any plans for any future Japanese produced Godzilla movies. So, although, Hideaki Anno, who did Shin Godzilla and also, Evangelion, he's directing Shin Ultraman. So
Shin Ultraman, yep.
That could kind of be like, hint for something that's going to be coming in. Like maybe if that's well received as well, maybe he gets another crack at Godzilla.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. I mean, I am so excited if that's what they did with a Godzilla film. Ultraman, you could take that in so many directions. So I'm very excited to see what they do with that. I've seen the stills, and I think like a little 15-second teaser. And
there's a trailer that came out already. I think it's like it's longer than 15 seconds. I think it's like maybe a minute or 2 minutes long that just came out fairly recently, in the past few weeks. So you should be able to find that on YouTube.
Oh, nice.
But it looks good from what little we've seen so far. And after Shin Godzilla, like I'm totally trusting Anno to do whatever he feels he has to do with it.
Absolutely. I mean, him and Shinji Higuchi, I think those guys can do no wrong in my eyes, really.
Is Ultraman also Toho?
Ultraman is Subaraya.
Oh, okay.
Which I don't know if Subaraya got bought out by anybody recently, but traditionally it's always been a Subaraya.
Okay, because I wondered if they, after they did Godzilla and they brought Kong back in Skull Island and they're doing Godzilla versus. I wonder if maybe we'd see a similar thing with Godzilla and Ultraman now. You got the same guy directing them both.
That would be cool. I know that they are doing that in there have been some comics that have, I think, combined the two.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that'd be very interesting to see. I'm there opening day.
Yeah. Okay, well, any final thoughts about this movie? I know you basically just said it's your favorite of the big monster movies. Anything else you'd like to add to that?
I'm such a fan of this movie. I wish more people saw it. I in the States, I know it's free on Prime, so if you have the slightest inkling to watch something giant monster related, I encourage everybody to go check it out. Um, yeah, I mean, I thought I was going to come on this podcast and just be like, and this was cool, and this was cool, and this was cool. It could have gone that way.
It could have, yeah.
But yeah, there's so much to love in this movie. And there's a lot of weirdness and like I said, I consider myself like such a fan of this movie. The ending, however, sometimes I'll skip it, or sometimes I just pretend it doesn't exist. So it's like, for me, almost a perfect take on the genre, a perfect little you know deceptively heart-wrenching movie. You really don't, at least I didn't at first go into it thinking that it was going to be this emotional. And I'm so happy that it was, because you don't get that from tokusatsu shows at all. It's just loud noises and fight. So this was yeah, it was just a really great take, and grounded and surreal at the same time.
I think that to really love this movie, I think you do have to have that fondness for the kaiju stuff to begin with.
Absolutely.
Like I'm not as well versed in it. Like I've only seen a few of the Godzilla movies, and so I'm not as, like, I grew up with Power Rangers obviously as well, but I'm not as tied into that as probably you are, or as some of the other people who've shown it to it. So it doesn't speak to me on the same level, but I can definitely see that appeal in this movie if you are a fan of that stuff. And like I said, there is a lot of good stuff in it. We were talking about his performance is really well done, and I really like the commentary we got on Japanese society that's worked in there. We didn't mention this, but there was also the scene where he's talking with his agent, and he's talking about how he hates nationalists, which is also a callback, because you look at the footage of his grandfather, which is very much, rooted. Those newsreels are very much like nationalist type newsreels.
It seems very propaganda-ish.
Yeah,
a little bit.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So I did like that, and I think, and with a movie like this, especially with him criticizing when you got the monster coming in from Korea or China or wherever it is, and the whole thing with like the U.S. coming in and kind of like forcing him to take part in this stuff, it could really go easily. They could have taken this movie in a pro-nationalist direction, and they did. They put in just enough stuff to show you that that's not what they're trying to do.
Right. Yeah. The political message and stuff and sentiment is there, but that's all it is. It's just there.
Yeah.
It's not built upon or expounded upon that much, but I do like that it's there, because it is such a, our relationship with Japan is so interesting. I mean, you and me grew up, they were our best friends,
right?
Pretty much. I mean, it's England and Australia and who else? Well, Japan. They're our guys. So it's always interesting to me to see somebody of like Daisato's generation, and what they think about like Japan-U.S. relations, and even the people our age. I find it very interesting, because it's such a complex system we've imposed, and it's like, well, now we're giving, the JDF has more power than it used to. Now I guess they can act without us and all this, but all right, now I'm getting political.
That's a much longer
that's a longer podcast,
much more convoluted, as well.
But it is very interesting to see that, like, just in in any medium, because you saw it in Shin Godzilla.
Yeah.
You see it actually in that Fukushima 50 movie. Yeah, that's always a element that I guess is going to be there until a new generation comes around.
It's also very much in there in like Battle Royale. It's heavily the Japanese politics in Battle Royale. Or if you know anything about Japanese politics, like you can see just like how scathing Fukusaku was in his criticism in that movie.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I love it. That's one of the reasons I teach it. It's just like here are all the reasons why the LDP is terrible.
Yeah, pretty much, right?
Yeah.
Just a complete list right in front of your face. Beat Takeshi, just giving it to you.
Yeah, and this movie it touches on that, but it's not as heavily into them as some of those other movies are. And like we did mention, it does get really drawn out, and that ending is, even with my interpretation, which I think kind of makes it a little bit more sensical, it's still very nonsensical.
It's still nonsensical, disturbing. Kind of leaves you feeling what? I do like how they the very last scene is them, but just as action figures on like a straw or in a string. I love that. It's like a little send off to 60s era Ultraman.
I did like that too. Yeah, that stood out to me as well. And when I watched that ending, because it was late at night, I was getting I had a long day, I was getting a little bit tired, and I for a moment I honestly didn't know if I was still awake or not.
Yeah. I've also had people while they were over watching the movie, because we'd be talking and stuff. Some people actually thought another movie had started, or there was something wrong with the DVD, or some other movie got spliced in. So it really does throw you through a loop big time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Patrick, thanks so much for coming on the show. One final thing. Do you have any other final things to say, or anything you wanted to promote? I know you said you got your books. Could you let people know what name to search under for those? Just so.
Oh yeah, sure. If you search Patrick Moody, The Gravedigger's Son is my first book, and the upcoming one is called Creatures of Clay.
Okay.
And that should be available Amazon, pretty much wherever you can get books. And the best place to follow me, I'm not on too many socials. Instagram is probably the biggest one. So I'm at Pat Moody Writes. I'm always posting random stuff, usually with this guy on there. So you can follow me there, or my website, patrick-moody.com. Big updates coming soon. I haven't updated that website in like 6 months, but there's been a lot of news. So I gotta get back in there and update it. So you can find all my stuff there.
Okay, we'll make sure to post up the link to the website on our site as well. So if you go to japanonfilm.com, there's a little section, friends of the show. You can find links to Patrick's stuff and to all the other guests who have been on the show. Okay, Patrick, once again, thanks so much for coming on. We'll have to have you come back on in a future episode, talk about something else.
Absolutely. Would love to come back. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. All right, that does it for this episode of Japan on Film. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much for listening. Please make sure to go to japanonfilm.com. Follow us on Instagram or Twitter, Japan on Film at both of those. And please, leave us a review, like our page on YouTube, and tell your friends about us. That does it for now. We do have other episodes coming this season. We're just still working out the schedules a little bit, so I'm not 100% sure what the next movie is going to be. So you'll find out next week. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll talk to you next time. Thanks for watching this episode of Japan on Film. For more of our videos, just hit the subscribe button.